unleash the truth in Room 592. Room 592 every Monday to Friday from 19 hours 30 to 20 hours 30 with Dr. Yog Mahadeo and senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Leonard Gildarie. Room 592 on Kaieteur Radio, the radio with a difference.
Obey your thirst for the truth.
Because you're worth knowing the truth.
Quench it with Kaieteur Radio.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Berbice 99.5 FM.
COVID-19 tips sponsored by Dex Soap. 1. Practice social distancing. 2. Wear your mask when leaving the house. 3. Wash your hands regularly for 20 seconds using our Dex Soap. 4. Cover your nose and mouth with a disposable tissue or flex elbow when you cough or sneeze. Choose Dex Soap for that extra cleanliness. Dex Soap is affordable and available nationwide.
It is 19 hours 30 all across Guyana, and it is time to enter room 592 this evening. And the helm of the program, as usual, Dr. Yog Mahadeo and his co-host, Mr. Leonard Gildarie. Good evening, gentlemen.
Yog, go ahead and unmute your mic, please. Good evening. Welcome to this. Yes, go ahead, Yog.
Yes, sorry. Good evening to you, Mr. Kevin Smith, and good evening to you, Mr. Gildarie. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to all of you, and good evening, of course, to the Kaieteur Radio and Kaieteur News family, management and staff of Kaieteur team, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, a special hello to Mr. Glenn Lal, who's made this contribution of having this program made available for the benefit of Guyana and its development. We're being joined tonight by our political scientist, Mr. Freddie Kissoon. He is joining us on the line, and I know that Mr. Gildarie had promised to set up your system properly, Mr. Kissoon. I think he has failed from that promise, but we do welcome you to our room 592. And ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you're joining us from, whatever country, whatever part of Guyana you're joining us from, welcome to room 592, where we unleash the truth. And let me just say at the top of this program, we are privileged to have Mr. Freddie Kissoon here with us tonight once again, because his unique, using his training and his studies as a political scientist, his unique view is indeed welcome, given the strange happenings in Guyana. Just when you think things are behind you and you can move on with life and you can move on with things in this country, there is a curveball coming. And ladies and gentlemen, we are also going to be joined by Mr. Sanjeev Datadin for about 10 to 15 minutes, and we're going to get some of his legal views with regards to the language of the letter from Madam Claudette Singh. And there is Mr. Sanjeev Datadin, and we have Mr. Freddie Kissoon online. This will be an interactive session, and Sanjeev, we welcome you here. Mr. Kissoon, you're there, right?
Yes, I'm here, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kissoon. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you all to this room 592 once again. And I want to open up by asking Mr. Datadin, from a legal perspective, sir, we have seen letters and letters and letters written back and forth. We have seen Mr. Lowenfield ask for clarity, and we have seen the Iron Lady just shove it right back at him and say, just get on with it, and my letter stands. However, counsel, we have also seen, and I've taken note of it, and it's up to you to tell us whether there is a distinction. In Madam Chairman's first letter to him, she said, you are hereby requested. And in this late missive as of today, she said, you are required. And so the tones of the letter seems to be changing as well. Over to you, counsel. And Mr. Kissoon, please feel free to interject and ask, and let's get put this counsel on the hot spot. Sanjeev, over to you.
Good evening, you. Good evening, Leonard. Good evening, Freddie. And of course, good evening to my beautiful wife. Yog, this is the exchange of letters that has been going on. Is if it weren't so serious, and if Guyana wasn't in the position it was, it would be very funny. I think the first letter was very clear. I know that people had a view that if you say request as opposed to instruct, but as a matter of interpretation, the two words, as far as the legal import would go, would be identical. The second letter is indeed a little bit more firm. But what has to be observed is, one, when there was court proceedings pending based on Mingo's declaration, Lowenfield, despite there being an order that was granted by Justice Navindra Singh, had his declaration ready for the commission to consider. That's one. Two, on the second occasion, where the Court of Appeal gave quote-unquote guidance to the interpretation of Article 177, Mr. Lowenfield, there was a stay order. A stay means the judgment does not take effect for the period of that stay. In violation of the order, Mr. Lowenfield had his numbers where he discarded 115,000 votes. Now the Caribbean Court of Justice has set out in a clear map, this is what happens, and he is playing games and saying about he needs clarification. Now, if you actually read his letter, you would realize just how childishly foolish it is, and making an issue where there is none, stating things that he saw in the Caribbean Court of Justice judgment where they did not say it, and requesting whether it's Section 18 or Article 177 of the Constitution that he is being directed to do a report. Well, if he doesn't know these things, what report he thinks he's doing? Why does he think he has to do a report? If he doesn't know these things, and if he's unwilling to do his job, he should be dismissed. And tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, if he doesn't have a report, he must be fired. He is a public officer who, in the face of responsibility to a nation that is waiting, is deliberately making a difficulty where there is none, trying to do things when he should not. So this is the equivalent, the only example I could think of is you're playing cricket and the umpire is on the other side. He has no interest in listening to or be adjudicating fairly. He cannot remain. Now, we have to understand why he can't remain. Because the CEO's function as a public officer owes a duty to every one of us who are citizens of this country. You don't have a dog in the fight. You're not supposed to have a dog in the fight. You're not supposed to be so eager to deliver and then be difficult when it is that there is clear direction. You see, those are transparent things. I said to you last night, Yog, that if Lowenfield would listen to proper advice, and if he had the brain that he pretends to have, then what he really would do, Yog, is present the figures. That is his best defense to the misfeasance in public office charge that he currently is facing.
Right.
His best defense was to present it. But he is clearly indicating that he is unwilling to do so. I don't want to go through in great length, but do you know that everything he has said in paragraph 39 of the CCJ judgment is fully explained? And if you would bother to read it, it would clear it up. It says very clearly, Order 60 was made, carefully crafted for a purpose. A recount was to be done. The supervisors and the district officers are to sign it. They are to prepare matrices. Those matrices are to be supplied to Mr. Lowenfield. Mr. Lowenfield was expected to present a summary of those matrices to GCOM, who would deliberate upon it and give him instructions what to present to them for Section 96. I have abbreviated it obviously because instead of reading word for word.
Right.
But if Mr. Lowenfield is interested in hearing the answers to his questions and his stupid quandaries and his childish games are in paragraph 39, clear as day.
Okay.
And if he would bother to consider that the direction given to him, whether it be Section 18 of the Elections Act or whether it be Article 177 of the Constitution, is irrelevant.
Okay.
Section 18, Yog, is very short. You know what it says? It says the Chief Executive Officer shall remain under the direction and control of the Guyana Elections Commission.
Right.
That is a general purpose. At all times, he is under their control. Article 177 says that he is to give his advice to the chairman.
Correct.
So one is, let's say, the overarching provision, and one is the specific.
That's right.
Now, the only mention of the CEO's function to do anything in the Constitution is to offer that advice. Now, all he has to do, it matters not what report which instruction he thinks he has. He has been instructed. It matters not which power is being invoked. He has been instructed. It matters not when he says that Article 60, Order 60 was, the court somehow or the other interfered with it. The court never did that, you know. What the court said is if you think anything of 60, which is inconsistent with the Act, the Representation of the People's Act, or inconsistent with the Constitution, that's not what it means.
Okay.
So the court didn't strike it down. The court did the opposite. The court said no interpretation to it can be ascribed, which is inconsistent. So all the court has done is recognize, as every lawyer knows, and every law student, and every person who's done a law degree, like a certain Mr. Mahadeo here, you know there's a hierarchy of legislation. Constitution, Acts of Parliament, then you get all the subsidiaries, which are regulations, and then you get these orders that are gazetted. So there's a hierarchy. And the court is simply saying that the lower one cannot amend the upper one.
Correct.
So the lower one must be interpreted at all times in accordance with the higher one. And if it is inconsistent and it cannot be resolved, then to the extent of that inconsistency, that part is severed, doesn't have. But look at what Lowenfield is continuing to do. Basil Williams puts a statement out this morning that he should disobey the CCJ. That is contempt.
Sanjeev, let's bring in Mr. Kissoon on that note. Freddie, welcome once again, and I would like you to if you don't mind, share your thoughts on the missive that Williams published in the Guyana Rag this morning. I'm sorry, the Guyana Chronicle this morning. Williams published virtually an instruction, in my view, to Keith Lowenfield to say you don't have to abide with the instructions of the chairman. Over to you, Mr. Kissoon.
Well, I want to zero in on Claudette Singh.
Yes.
Sanjeev said that in the context of law, instruction and persuasion mean the same thing. Epistemologically, it may not. I think instruction has a coercive dimension to it in which the choice of maneuver is limited, whereas request has a persuasive dimension in which there's some room to maneuver. If you're instructed and you're requested, there may be different levels of maneuverability. And that is why I bring Claudette Singh into the picture. I am pellucid in my mental thoughts about Claudette Singh. Whatever happens, and Claudette Singh does the right thing, and we get on with the democratic election of the party that won the election, it will not mollify my perceptions of Claudette Singh. I think we're in this mess because of Claudette Singh. And one must remember a crucial Friday afternoon. A crucial Friday afternoon where Ms. Singh could have allowed us to have the reenactment of Burnhamism. If it wasn't for an injunction by the Chief Justice, now she's doing her job, but she's also created a piece of history. If that lady did not issue an injunction against the Mingo Declaration, that guy would have been sworn in Saturday morning because Lowenfield had alerted the commission that a declaration, a tabulation, a compilation, or whatever word you want to use, was made, and the commission was to meet on Saturday. All of that should have been circumvented by Claudette Singh. So in the context of the change of our word from persuasion, from instruction to persuasion, I would like to put a cynical interpretation to that. Secondly, I am not in agreement with her second letter to Lowenfield. If Lowenfield is mischievous, and I think he is, if he's devious, insidious, Machiavellian, then the second letter gives him a way out. He wrote to Singh saying, I don't understand. I don't comprehend. You have to put me in a frame of mind with clarification. She should then have written a letter saying, based on what you wrote to me, I am making the following clarification for you. Go with the company's red car. Do not go with the company's blue car. Go with the company's chief of security. Do not go with a subordinate security. Then she enumerates from A to Z and said, these are my clarifications. I expect a report based on your adherence to my clarification. What she did is repeat it to him, and he said to her, I don't understand. Now, he's being mischievous. He is being devilish. He's being criminal and perverted. But she is giving him room to continue his criminality. Now, he could go back tomorrow and say, Madam Chairman, I am honestly saying to you, I need clarification. You have not provided me with that. Now, she could say to him, but look, the CCJ's decision is there. Look, the laws are there. Look, Sanjeev Datadin and Nandalal have used pellucid language in describing it for you. But he could still say, I want you to explain it to me. Please explain it to me. And she should have sat down and wrote the clarification for him. I may be wrong, but I think Lowenfield is going to say tomorrow, you did not provide me with the clarification I asked for. Now, my cynicism is Claudette Singh still doing conspiratorial things. Now, people may say that she has brought us to the point where the declaration has to be made. I don't know about that. I think there is too much gray areas in the diploma of Claudette Singh. You asked me about Bassett Williams. Well, Williams and the rest of them have to say what they have to say. They have lost an election. Their future is in jeopardy. They will defy logic. They will defy rationality. So what Williams said is natural, and I just think he's following his leader, Granger, and others. Granger went out to Main Street and told his people the equivalent to what Williams said. Williams told Lowenfield, don't accept the thing. But Granger actually said to those supporters in Main Street, I don't accept the CCJ. There have been fraudulent votes. So I am not going to put any dignity.
So Freddie, I want to come back to you on something, and Sanjeev, you as well. The Lowenfield's letter to Claudette Singh boils down to me, in my own mind, something that does not reconcile. He is saying that he required, in this regard, clear guidance is required with respect to whether the report being requested is premised on Section 18 of the election laws or on Article 177(2)(b). And I don't know that those two are speaking. One is talking about an authority, and one is talking about what you have to do when you get that authority. Sanjeev?
You're actually right. There is no difference as far as he's concerned. But what it is nothing more than a transparent attempt to delay, to use his office and to create a fiction for the sole purpose of saying either he is confused or trying to introduce confusion into the commission. He is not, for example, if he was unclear immediately following the decision of the Caribbean Court of Justice, what he should have done is he should have had his report ready. If he was unclear when he received that letter yesterday from the chairwoman, he should have said, this was the report I was doing. I'm not sure if this is what you mean or this is not what you mean. You wouldn't wait until the 2 p.m. deadline. Come, so that you buy yourself and you buy those masters whom you serve more time. I don't agree in one aspect of what Freddie said. I don't believe that Claudette's second letter gave a way out or said anything that would be or can be inferred to have diminished the first letter. I think the second letter, it is frequently, when you write a demand letter, I'm speaking in legal circles, it is frequent that when you write a demand letter and someone gives you a smart response to say that you might not have spelled their name correctly, or the date is thing, or the address you've put on the letter is not their address, or something along those lines, that you usually respond, or even when they ask for silly clarifications like this one, you would usually respond back to them and say, my earlier letter stands, which means very clearly that you have said what they have said to you, you have taken in what they have said, you have looked at your first letter, you think it is clear enough, it is direct enough, and there is no need for you to do any explanation or alteration to it. So what she did,
Sanjeev,
very common.
Take a pin there. So if, going to what Freddie said now, if Lowenfield walks into that room tomorrow and say, Madam Chairman, you have done nothing to ease my confusion, to help me, to give me clarity, what next?
She should say, well, I'll find somebody who could speak English. And if you can't understand the instructions you have and you can't fulfill the job to which you have been paid by the state to do, then we have to find somebody else to do it.
Commissioner Alexander would have said to the media this afternoon that there is no point as yet, in his mind, I believe, that Lowenfield would have breached any of the protocols that are required of him to warrant summary dismissal, or what he's saying is you cannot get rid of Lowenfield until there is disciplinary action initiated against him.
That is not true.
Meaning then that I think he's meaning then that disciplinary action is a time-bound process as well.
Absolutely not true, Yog. Let us be clear. Public officials have different responsibilities. When you are hired, for example, as a civil servant, and you are a clerk in a bank, they're two different things, assuming the bank is private. You understand? When you are working in a private enterprise, there is a different scheme of things that apply. When you are working in the public service, then a different scheme of rules apply. And when you are a public official charged with discharging a public function, that is different. Now, what it is a matter for the commission only. They don't need to do any of the things. If you appear unwilling or unable to do the job that you are charged with doing, the commission does not have to play which hoop to jump through in your circus. They don't have to do that. You see, what Alexander's trying to do, which is what he's clever at doing, is conflating issues that seem apparently logical, that relate to different matters, and tell people, well, you can't do this until you do that. And you can't do this. I have never heard in all of these 4 months, Mr. Alexander provide what I would term a solution for any of the challenges. He has many, many, many suggestions of what is going wrong and what must be considered and how much more we must delay. His most recent, he's advocating that we have new elections. He doesn't realize that this one is not over yet, and GCOM has no power to declare a null election. They have to declare a winner. So he's going down a path. He's going down a path to say that you can't. Yog, it's a simple thing. This is a public official. He has public functions to discharge. If you were there, Yog, you could total up these numbers for us in your head. And you will tell us what the allocations would be.
Right.
You understand? This is not rocket science. For you to get into the kind of thing you're doing, Yog, if this person worked for you, you would consider that to be insubordination. Being difficult, what we would colloquially say to being difficult. If Leonard went with that to Glenn, you would hear the shouting. You would hear the shouting in. You would hear the shouting in Berbice that he would get.
So let's see, Mr. Kissoon, Freddie, your thoughts. And I hate to throw this seemingly unimportant question at you, Freddie, but I believe it all adds up. A couple weeks back, Leonard Gildarie questioned Mr. Alexander to say, what's this thing about annulling an election? Is that a possibility? And I think, Leonard, Mr. Alexander's response to you was that you can only annul something that has been declared.
That's correct.
Freddie, now today, Alexander is saying that the solution he sees is fresh elections.
Well, the first response to that is, if you have a fresh election, will the PNC, will Alexander accept there's a loser and a winner? The question of fresh election is totally impossible in the context of what goes on in Guyana, the ontology of the PNC, AFC, and GCOM. If you have an election that was observed by some of the most prestigious bodies in the world, in which the tabulation and counting was almost commonsensically done, and the PNC doesn't accept it and Alexander doesn't accept it, how does the question of another election arise? I, as a citizen and someone with a pen, a public pen, would oppose another election simply on the basis that if the PNC loses, they will not accept it. So that's a non-starter. That's a non-starter. The only election you should have is when the present election, in which no evidence has been produced for I to see that the election was fraudulent and the election was vitiated by fraudulent process, then I think we had an election that was, to use Guyanese word, fit and proper, and therefore we should go on with it. But to get back to the seminal curiosity, why anyone in any part of the world, even in Greenland, think that if there's another election in Guyana, the PNC will accept losing it? I mean, David Hines, I would think, is the PR spokesman for the PNC, and he has clearly adumbrated a position that it is either the APNU remain in government or we don't have any election. Scrap this thing. And I think someone told me, I'm not on Facebook, James Bond said, either the APNU must be declared the winner or we don't have an election. So that is telegraphing your thoughts. And all Alexander did is telegraph his thoughts. Let's have another election, and if the PNC don't win, let's have another election. I mean, Alexander, for somebody I know all my life because we born a corner away from each other in Watermanville, sometimes he descends to the level of comical analysis. Like, I remember he once said, when the recount was accepted and the recount started, he said, well, the recount would not be a basis for making a declaration. And so a lot of people said, well, why are you having a recount in the first place? No, what Aubrey Norton said today in an interview with the Trinidadian Media House is a repetition of so many of them that they are not prepared to accept a legally university recognized election results in Guyana. So you're going to get all kind of language and grammar that makes them look absurd.
Mm-hmm. So, Freddie, I want to come back to you on that same point then, because we got 250,000, 300,000 people in Guyana that would have voted and would have a desire of seeing the back of the PNC. What do we then say, or what do we as a people now think if this set of persons in office never wants to give up? Elections doesn't matter anymore. We have a dictatorship, and you're already seeing, sorry to be long-winded, you're already seeing a number of PNCP persons are basically saying, let's have a state of emergency. Let the president take control of the country. What then? Whither Guyana? What then the people of Guyana, sir?
Look, when Keith Rowley said it's not going to end well, I think we put an everyday-ish, banal, ordinary interpretation to that. But what Rowley, the undertones of Rowley's exclamation is that it's not going to end well for Guyana in totality. That includes the illegal government. And then what Rowley meant is that you're going to have terrible consequences that will drown the PNC too. So if the PNC thinks that this is the 70s, look, the dialectics which governs life and governs social movement have changed so deeply and so immensely from the 70s that it's virtually impossible for an unknown, unimportant country like Guyana in terms of the world economy, in terms of geopolitics. We are no important player in the configuration of international political economy. So there is no way a country like this, the world is going to accept a rogue government. And there's an aspect of realpolitik that is involved here that Granger should understand that countries are going to use the example of Guyana to show the world that they are defenders of democracy. That look what we're doing. Guyana has a legal government, a rule government, and we are not going to tolerate that. And it's in the interest of big international players to do this, because they will say to themselves, if we are such major players in the world, and an obscure country like Guyana could insult us, have a rigged election, and we tolerate a low government, then our pervasive, our penetrative influence in the world comes to an end. And that is what Granger doesn't understand that is at stake here. You know what is at stake here? The very credibility of the foreign policies of Canada, the EU, the very credibility of CARICOM as a successful integration movement. Now, what happens to CARICOM if the Granger government defies the CCJ and the election results and stay in power? That you're talking about the collapse of CARICOM. You're talking about disrespect for CARICOM. Now, let me clear up a misconception that the Guyanese people accepted, and that's because I think they were so overjoyed at when it happened. That recount was not the idea, the initiative of David Granger. Again, I repeat about Rowley. Rowley is far more, is angrier than Gonzalez and Motley, because Rowley knew that Granger reneged on the word he gave to 5 CARICOM prime ministers. And that is why when, do you know, Motley contacted Rowley about rescinding the team after the Court of Appeals, after the full court said the recount would go on. And Rowley said, I want nothing to do with that process. That man reneged. He agreed to the recount, and he reneged. We have to be very grateful to Motley, because Rowley had washed his hand. It is Motley that said, COVID or no COVID, they could put the team up in Pegasus or what happened. We're going back there and observe the recount, because the credibility of CARICOM is at stake. So this thing is not the 70s or the 80s. The world has dialectically changed so much that there's no resemblance to the 70s. So to get back to Rowley's exclamation, it will not end well. A lot of people are thinking about riots and this and that. It will not end well for Guyana and CARICOM.
Correct. If I may, Freddie, I just want to take you back to that same discussion point you just raised. Now, with regards to Trinidad, one could say, or could one say that Rowley pulled out of anything to do with Guyana because he knew he was getting elections in 2-3 months' time, and at the end of the day, there is a lot of pressure on Guyana. Trinidad's population is similar to Guyana, and there is a lot of pressure on racial and other kinds of voting. So Rowley, it is argued, would have pulled out because he didn't want to upset a particular base in Trinidad that might be voting for him in August. Your say, sir.
Well, I don't want to, if that is so, and that may be so, I don't want to dilute his original attitude. And his original attitude as part of a 5-member CARICOM Prime Minister team was given the assurance by Granger that they will accept a recount and bring this obfuscating impasse to an end. And I think he felt personally insulted as the leading economy in CARICOM. And let's face it, Trinidad is a billion times a more robust economy than Guyana. Now, there may be something there. There may be something there about the ethnic configuration in Trinidad, and he may say, listen, if I am seen encouraging Granger with his nonsense, it could have consequences to me. But the other thing the other thing you have to look at, he also is concerned that if he goes along with Granger and his nonsense, he himself is opening his credibility to question in Trinidadian society. But initially,
so Freddie, I have a question
I think
for Sanjeev, and then I want to come back to you on another point you raised with the following view. But I'll go to Sanjeev first. But let me say this to you. The point I want to come back to you with, Freddie, is Granger has obviously thumbed his nose at the international community. I mean, every country who has had something to say to Guyana about their elections and about declaration has said it. And it has moved these people. And I'll come back to you with your thoughts to that, because I believe Granger is now saying to the world, do whatever you want. I don't have to listen to you. You're nobody. I got the oil money. Sanjeev, question for you, sir. Coming from one of the viewers. Is there any likelihood or any potential that the chairman can take control of the situation, use the first report Lowenfield presented to her as the basis of her making a declaration?
You see, there is a part that could be done in terms of Article 162, which is that you can direct an official of GCOM to do a particular act, and if they don't, you can direct someone else, which means you can for yourself take a decision. Realistically, I've seen that promulgated publicly, but the better attitude might be to remove the CEO, appoint a CEO, because the board is entitled to do that. You swear in a new CEO and let him do the job that is required.
Let me interject quickly to say that the public perception is also wary of the deputy CEO who would step into that role.
No, you see, that's a misconception, Yog. The way it works in public commissions, all public bodies, is you don't automatically move upwards, you don't get promoted. For example, in the situation when Mr. Boudou, his contract was not renewed, his deputy was Lowenfield. But Lowenfield had to apply for the job, as did several other persons who applied for that job. And Lowenfield ended up being the successful candidate. But the promotion in a public agency does not work that way. As in a private agency, it would be more akin to moving up. But it always gets to the point that when you get to the top level of management, the top strata of management, it is not usual, or it might happen, but it is not very usual that the progression be always based on who is next in line. So what the commission would have to do, what they would have to do upon the removal of Lowenfield, is the commission will have to vote that X is now the chief elections officer.
Mm-hmm. So if it's not Myers, who else is it going to be?
If we were to apply what you would have gotten used to, counsel, in terms of your legal practice, can you find somebody? One could argue that would you be able to find somebody who is not now biased one way or another in these elections that can that can fit into this job overnight and conduct it with impartiality?
No, but to come back, if I may, counsel, if you use an argument that you're using there, which is that Myers can't move upwards, that means you would have to go and advertise it. What about the time of that? The timing and so on, isn't that going to be cause for further delays?
They don't need to be. You see, the commission, and that's why the Commission Act gives the commission the powers that they do. The commission can act quickly. For example, The commission can fire Lowenfield at 11 o'clock and appoint someone else at 10 past 11.
And where are you going to find that person from, if I may ask?
Pardon?
Where are you going to find that person from? Anybody?
Well, the commission will make the decision. Now, I understand what the concern of people would be, that what you have to do is place an advertisement and receive the best candidate.
Right.
But the circumstances of where we are now, those rules would not have to apply because of the exigency of the situation. You need to find someone who the commission has the confidence in that will do the job. That is the best case scenario that I would suggest is there, because it would be a full compliance with the Constitution. For the commission to go ahead, which there is a possibility of doing, I don't recommend that be done, because what you're doing is you're going ahead without a full secretariat, and you should go ahead for with a full secretariat, because roles are provided for various persons. So the most sensible position of removing him is for the commission to decide that someone come back. Now, I don't want to mention his name. He's a gentleman who's a very good friend of my father's. He's the previous chairman of the Elections Commission, but surely he will know what is entailed in the job. And if the commission were to say, well, you were to come back to be the CEO to do this, then maybe Dr. Surjbhai be willing. I don't know, but you could certainly think that there's a list of people. There is Rudy Collins, who was the chairman before. There is Joe Singh. There are other people that can do what you need to do to do the job. But you see, I understand the apprehension people have that you have to advertise the job and pick the best person.
No, but Sanjeev, I think there's a missing link here, if I may jump in. If you listen to Alexander very well, he was bringing out his Freudian mind. He spoke about without a hearing. If Lowenfield is fired tomorrow, GCOM cannot make a declaration because there will be an injunction to prevent his firing, and Claudia Singh is going to say, well, look, let the court case take its course.
No, Freddie, you raise an excellent point. And let me just allay the fears of what the law is in that area. There is only one, not there is only, but the principal one that there is you cannot compel someone to hire you. You cannot compel that they hire. If they have dismissed you wrongfully, you get damages. The more egregious the dismissal, the fatter your pocket. You get more money. You can't compel people to work with people.
No, so, but you can't. No. How are you going to stop? How are you going to stop Claudia? How are you going to stop them from filing the injunction? Or how are you going to stop Claudia from saying the matter is now in the court? Let's wait.
No, the court can't grant an injunction.
No, he's saying that before it even reaches the court would have to grant something, and the court is not going to do that because of the laws.
No, the court has no power. The court has no power to stop the job going on while you determine what it is. Your remedy is damages.
So Sanjeev,
an injunction ought not be granted where damages is an adequate remedy.
Good. So Sanjeev and Freddie, just let's put it in perspective. And Sanjeev, I'll hand over to you immediately after this. So put it in perspective, Sanjeev. You were saying basically that if somebody is terminated or facing disciplinary action, it does not and it must not be conflated with the work that has to go on. So any person can be terminated. The court can listen to it as whether you were wrongfully terminated or whatever, but the work has to go on. And for that, you are saying that the GCOM could not proceed and no injunction could stop them from carrying through with the work, right?
We have to understand the situation at hand. And this is what you have to consider. If, for example, God forbid that something were to happen to any of the persons involved in this scenario, then you have to have some mechanism of replacing people. So the law wouldn't put you in a position if you are to dismiss, for example, Lowenfield. You don't have to have a position that while Mr. Lowenfield brings his action for wrongful dismissal or unlawful dismissal, while he is doing that in a court, you don't have to sit and wait for it to be adjudicated, because even if he is to it, he's not coming back to the job that he's lost. He has to get compensation and damages.
Okay.
What you
Freddie.
deprive them of, and the court will assess those damages. Now, in circumstances where damages is an adequate remedy, the court would not grant an injunction. You only grant injunctions where damages are not an adequate remedy. And in the facts of these situations, you can't possibly say that an injunction by any stretch of the imagination, even if it were possible, would be a reasonable remedy. So the position of removing Lowenfield is to appoint someone who, to the satisfaction of the commission, will do what the law requires. Lowenfield, Vincent Alexander is proffering various things about Lowenfield will have a response. He does not appreciate, because what he has been doing for the last 4 months is playing games with words, using common sense and common parlance and rhetoric to fool people as to what the legal standing and position of various things are. People who don't know any better, and they go along because they trust him as a leader in the political arena. He is considered a leader. He is abusing that trust. He is misleading people and telling them things that is not the law. Let him point to anywhere that you can dismiss a man and he will stop the working of a commission while he goes to speak to a judge to have him reinstated.
Right.
Let him throw you one precedent, other than perhaps Russia, where he studied, that might be possible.
Let's take this. Let's hand over to Freddie. Freddie, your mic is yours, sir.
No, well, I am not a lawyer. Sanjeev would have experience in how it works. What I do have experience in is the corrugated nature of this society. We have had certain expressions of jurisprudence that have embarrassed this country, and embarrassed this country to the point where I think those damages may be permanent. I mean, 34 is the half.
33 and 34.
34 is the half. I mean, one judge in the CCJ was literally livid when pronouncing on that absurdity. You have a case where a Court of Appeal judge and a senior puisne judge inserted a word into the Constitution that was not there. So while I'm guided by the experience of Sanjeev, the difference with Sanjeev and the rest of Guyanese people is that they have, by the nature of the career and the employment, a certain respect for jurisprudence. They're officers of the law. We are, on the other hand, don't have that kind of faith in our judicial tradition. And it's quite possible a judge may very well grant the injunction. Do not put it past the Guyanese legal system to produce some of these absurdities. I can understand what is going on in the mind of Sanjeev, that this is the law, judges don't do these things, that wouldn't pass, etc. But this is Guyana. Well, that's my case.
I agree with you entirely, Freddie. But I also say that following the ruling, which was unusually worded, to put it mildly, very direct, almost abrasive, from the Caribbean Court of Justice in what recently happened. It would have to be a brave judge to step out on a limb and to hold this process back now. But they may be. I don't doubt you. We have seen ridiculous things happening, but it is what it is. But we still have to come back to the one position. Rest assured, we do not have to sit and remain at the mercy of Lowenfield. If Lowenfield decides he does not want to produce a report, he doesn't have to receive a salary from the state anymore. Mm-hmm. If he does not want to follow what the directions of GCOM is, he does not have to do so. He is free to leave. And if he doesn't leave, he can be asked to leave. And by asking to leave, I didn't mean that he would have a right to respond. So these positions are the realities that the legal groundwork will permit. Now, Lowenfield has to be aware that the things that he is doing, when it is, and I'm a great believer that I don't think that things are really coincidence as such when you look at what's going on. I don't believe it's an accident that you see the Mr. Williams espousing a view that you don't need to pay attention to the CCJ and you don't need to do what they're saying. And the next day you see Lowenfield come up with a cockamamie letter to say that I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do because I don't know what you're telling me to do and I don't quite understand the ruling of the CCJ. What he really needs to do is to do his job. As opposed to finding 10 reasons why he shouldn't do it, he should find one reason why he should do it. Because as a public officer, his obligation ought to be to the citizens of Guyana. Mm-hmm. But he, like Mingo, are pretending that they belong to a political party that directs them and that are their masters. Now, to say that, or for what I've just said, to have said it 6 months ago or a year ago, it would have practically been blasphemy. But you see, this is how it happens. I mean, I have had, without getting too personal about it, I have had experience where in some parts of the world, in my younger days in Europe, and I have come to know friends who were in countries which had wars. And it's two of them, and they say the same thing. It doesn't happen overnight that you wake up and realize that everybody has lost reason and it's a madman's world in your country. Mm-hmm. It's a slow creep. It's a slow creep that goes on day by day, where the rhetoric gets ratcheted up, where the people get more and more bold at doing wrong things, where people will fracture your rights with impunity and think and behave as if they're doing you a favor by granting you less rights than you're entitled to. That's how those things happen. And we have to realize that the more we tolerate public officials who will play games, who will pander to political directives, and who, at the end of it all, are unconcerned about what they put the nation to. They are putting the nation to a sword, and they are doing it fully well knowing that only a few is intended to benefit with it. Correct. What do you think will happen to Guyana? So if Lowenfield will not do his job, then there is ample authority to remove him and put anyone there who is willing to do the job that the law says he must do. He did not listen to either side. He simply has to do his job.
Thank you. So, Freddie, I want to come back to you for your thoughts on what Sanjeev said there, but to also put this for your consideration. Orrin Gordon from Trinidad said the following. He said, the chair, referring to Claudette Singh, the chair has shown us that she is a proceduralist, a by-the-book, careful, risk-averse person. She wants to leave no room for history or a potential legal challenge to give her grief. Over to you, Fred.
I don't know where Gordon got the factual stuff to arrive at that interpretation, or it could be just a superficial interpretation based on the reality of him being out of Guyana. But one of the quarrels I have had with the UC Guyana is when he said, look, I don't have the facts to arrive at a criticism of Claude Singh. And right there and then, I lost respect for him, who was written for 70 years about things he saw unfolding in Guyana. Now, this guy was therefore, to my mind, selecting facts to suit his attitudinal structure, because he knew what was happening in Guyana. A, B, C, D, knew what was happening in the election campaign. He knew what was happening, that they used spreadsheet in Region 3. So what was wrong in using a spreadsheet in Region 4? But yet he said in response to me, I don't have the facts about Kaieteur Singh. And there it is in the 21st century. A man can hold a phone in his hand and in Afghanistan, and you can see this man directing people in a room with a gun, right, and shooting them, and you could be in Guyana and seeing that if somebody's recording it on a smartphone. So all over the world, people were recording what Mingo was doing on March the 4th, and the complete, eerie silence of the person in charge of GCOM. And Mingo continued his morbid masturbation by taking the process from Ashman Building in Hatfield Street into Kingston, where thugs were pushing out party officials that had the right to be there. You mean to tell me this was no man's land? This was Chatto's land? This is a subordinate of GCOM taking his marauding mentality from Hatfield Street, taking it to Kingston, take a little piece of cardboard, strung a piece of bed sheet, and reading out numbers. This was just a caricature of a modern 21st century society. And that man was doing that, and he had a boss named Claude Singh to say, hey, you can't do that. I'm in charge of GCOM. And the only way that man was stopped is by court intervention. And this guy in Trinidad is telling me she's a proceduralist. Well, that means a person who follows procedure. But the basis of procedure, the basis of action, the basis of motive, the basis of behavior are ethics, are principles, are respect for laws. And Claude Singh may be following procedures while ignoring the fundamental tenets of human rights and ethics and principles. And if she was observing that while carrying out procedures, we would not be in this 4 months of what we are in. This 4 months
Freddie,
of
if I may, I just want to share for your consideration and comment, please, sir. Peter Wickham, who I know that you may know Peter. Peter has said the following. He said, it is now perhaps necessary to appreciate the extent to which this is now akin to a hostage situation and quite similar to the situation when Abu Bakr stormed the Red House in Trinidad. The tactics were different, but the outcome was the same in that he hijacked a democracy, and while he clearly was wrong, the failure of his coup meant a possible death sentence, and he therefore had nothing to lose. At this point, Keith Lowenfield and Clement Mingo are in exact the position that Abu Bakr was in during the failed 1990 coup. They are both facing charges for alleged misconduct, which could land them both in jail, and therefore they have nothing to lose. Over to you, Freddie, and then for your comments.
Well, I don't think the two situations could be likened the way Wickham has likened it. first of all, the Abu Bakr intransigence didn't have that kind of support that you're finding among some people that you never thought that would happen. I mean, look at the people who fought with Walter Rodney, who's supporting this thing. They're university lecturers who tolerating the abuse of Mia Motley and supposed to be women's rights activists. But there are some analogies there that cannot work. But the thing, where the analogy falls down is that Mingo and Lowenfield are just little subordinate players. They're being directed by the Abu Bakrs of Guyana without the gun in their hand. That is where the difference lies. That the other thing we are not looking at, and that's because we cannot say this, and there's a lawyer on the panel here, but we are not sure if, and I have to be careful how I say this, I'm not a lawyer, we have to be careful if Lowenfield is not, I don't know how to put it and stay in the right side of the law. We have to be careful if Lowenfield has not been an original conspirator, and therefore he cannot opt out of an agreement, of a covenant that he entered in. Anyway, I hope your viewers and readers are getting to what I mean. Sanjeev will have to be my lawyer.
You don't have to worry too much, Freddie. There are charges in the court alleging a conspiracy. He's been charged with conspiracy.
I want to say there's a dimension to that conspiracy that I can't speak about because I may get a libel from him.
And gentlemen, should we be reading anything about the ABC and EU countries meeting with the Army Chief today? And this would have followed on a statement that was coming from the UN Chief, Antonio Guterres, today about the elections as well. A lot of pressure being piled up. What is the significance of that meeting between the Army Chief and the ABC and EU countries?
And also, if you don't mind throwing the assessment of Gray just thumbing his noses at the international community.
Well, the meeting with the Army Chief and the ABCE countries, and recently, I think it was Wednesday, before the judgment was given, the same group of diplomats met with Miss Dr. Cummings, I think she is, Karen Cummings, they met with her. She is our foreign affairs minister. She's the person there at the moment. My understanding is they have informed the government of the expectation that democracy is to prevail and they're not to continue this slow creep to a dictatorship. And my guess would be that they have met with the persons in the army to assess for themselves whether they think that it's a problem or it's likely to be a hindrance to democracy. And I am certain it would have been to reinforce. Actually, one of the news articles that I read said that it was to reinforce that the commitment to democracy existed still in the army, and they were given such an assurance. The reason for it, I would say, Leonard, is we are behaving in Guyana, most of the people here, we're behaving as if we are never going to slip into a situation of anarchy or chaos. Those who have a little bit more experience and those who might have seen a little bit more are suggesting to me that we are not so far from being in a position that could be totally chaotic if our public officials are simply allowed to abandon their task and to take partisan positions, which is exactly why I have said, and I repeat myself, that Lowenfield has to be fired. I mean, I understand that everyone wants the niceties of notice and everyone wants to advertise for the job and give everyone the time to do it, but it can't be done in these circumstances. The commission would be well entitled to hire someone who has the capability of doing the job. And the reason is, if we get to a declaration and a swearing in, then Guyana is on a totally different footing. We could start the process of healing, hopefully. We can start the process of dealing with the pandemic that's got us by the throat. We can start the process of helping those poor people around who are struggling because there are no jobs, because they have no way they're not lazy, they just have no way to earn a living at the moment. And as the saying goes, you can't buy things with buttons. So they have no ability to find employment for themselves. So it's a struggle. It's a real struggle. As a result of all of those things going on, we need a government in place. We need a government that the people and the will of the people needs to be respected.
Right.
That is the only chance we have, Yog, of bridging the gap where we are now getting to a path.
I understand, but the geopolitical mix now, Freddie, over to you in terms of these same diplomats meeting with the army chief.
Okay, look, there are two paramount institutions in this country where power is overwhelming: the security forces and the cabinet. And we in the media and people like Sanjeev in the legal structure, we think we know from our contacts what goes on at the apex of the security force and the cabinet. But those powerful Western embassies in Guyana, they have the contacts, they have the data, they get the data, and they know what's going on. And there were three recent statements. One by the president on Main Street to his supporters, which with a subliminal message that we're not going anywhere. I mean, that more or less he was telling his supporters. The second one is Williams, and the third one is Aubrey Norton interview in which he virtually said the CCJ's decision is political. Now, they may have got information from inside the corridors of power. Don't forget they hobnob with cabinet members. They know they have their contacts in the security forces. And I believe they got intelligence that the PNC AFC are not going to give up government, are not going to observe the CCJ's decision. What they have done then, and they may very well meet the police, they probably know that you're now going to have an illegal government and sanctions are going to come. And they're probably meeting important stakeholders, and most importantly, state actors like the police and the army. And we don't know what was said there. Obviously, there had to be an exchange of confidential information. But I am guessing that they said to the army chief, in the coming days or the coming weeks, we're going to have a chaotic situation in Guyana in which a government remain in power despite the world saying it lost elections. Sanctions will be coming, and we would hope that the army, if there are any consequences, social or physical consequences of this illegal government, we would hope that you stick with the rule of law and observe the Constitution. And I think they're subtly sending a diplomatic message that things are going to unfold in the coming days and weeks, and we would expect you not to become a rogue army. That's how I see it.
Yog, I have to tell you this. I always, whenever I speak to Freddie, and whenever I get the opportunity to listen or read, I always do, because there's one thing about Freddie that he always reminds me of. Freddie is a true Cold War spook. he believes in the various conspiracies that go on, and not that he's wrong at all, but it's the way he says all the Cold War things that people would use the Zen of the universe, essentially. And he always says it. But, you know, sometimes when you do that, as Freddie does.
But hasn't Freddie been proven true over the past 100 and
that's what I was saying to you. There are some things that Freddie would speak about, and so that would be considered alarmist. But the true Cold War spooks, what they would actually assess is not one event. They would assess a series of events and realize that there is a connection. And the same series of events that Freddie mentions, that there was a speech and there was another speech and then there was a movement. All of us saw the same things and didn't see the things that Freddie did. And in the past few weeks, I must tell Freddie, I'm very disturbed that he's been right the way he has been right. Because I really wish that you were wrong, Freddie. I really wish that you were wrong. But the conclusions, all fun aside, the conclusions are very bleak. And unless there is active intervention to change the dynamic, I think maybe the worst case scenarios that Freddie's been talking about are going to be likely. But I do believe that we're far away enough from that to effect the changes we need.
Are we really
got
far
to the
away from it?
stage where a declaration will change the status of our country.
But the truth is that declaration was due 100 days ago, and it has not, and one thing after the other keeps pushing that declaration away. And 3 hours ago, Mr. James Bond has written the following: the PPP has tabled a motion to dismiss CEO Lowenfield. That is a wild and stupid move right now. It is a recipe for chaos. I don't think anyone is ready for the anger if that were to happen. Now, Mr. Attorney-at-Law, one of your colleagues at the bar used these words. It's a recipe for chaos. And I don't think, quote unquote, I don't think anyone is ready for the anger if that were to happen. These threats, Sanjeev, Guyanese have had enough.
I agree with you. And I also agree that it is, you've mentioned that one threat. But if you've been on Facebook, you would see that not only from, not from James, but from other persons, you would have seen similar rhetoric. And if you would say why the ABCE countries went to meet with the armed forces, that would be why. Because there is a ratcheting up of rhetoric. There is a concept. I mean, on the day of the decision of the Caribbean Court of Justice, I had a conversation with several people on that day, and I was astonished. I came home and I was having a conversation with my wife, and I was astonished that the common view of everyone is, notwithstanding the decision, the clarity of the decision, the pathway created by the decision, most of the people viewed it that the coalition was not going to give up. And I don't understand why, in the face of legal rulings of CARICOM, international agencies, they would just decide they do not want to leave. But it comes back to what Dominic Gaskin said. He said that they will not leave until they are satisfied that they have lost, and you have to prove it to them. Well, how are you going to prove it to them? Nobody there has a logical brain, at least not for the last 4 months. Nobody says anything there that has a semblance of truth in it, at least not publicly. So what exactly are you going to do? But you see, that is really where the bullyism is. And that's the other part that has to be dealt with. Because the belief is, if these roles were reversed, Yog, then there would have been people on the streets, and there would have been absolutely no way that the government, if the roles were reversed, the PPP would have been able to stay and say, we have to be satisfied of this, we have to be satisfied of that. And that must come to an end. And unfortunately, if the rhetoric keeps going, we are going to be treading in dangerous waters.
But that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. I would like us, if we can have a brief discussion. And Freddie, I want to take this straight over to you. If this nonsense continues, are we now, we're already at the edge. Are we going to go over? This afternoon, APNO AFC supporters were all over the road in front of GCOM. Doing what, and what were they hoping to achieve? We don't know. Over to you, sir.
Well, I can't see how it will come to that, because I don't think they're going to give up power. I said it in March in a column, and I'm repeating it here now. This is what I believe. Forget about AFC. They have no part in the intellectual war room. We're talking about the PNC and the African rights advisors to the PNC. This is what I believe is going to happen. I don't think they're going to come out of government. I don't think you're going to have a change of government. Mr. Ali is installed as a president, etc. This doesn't mean GCOM isn't going to make a declaration, though I doubt that. I believe these people are aiming for one of two things. The first one is stay in power. The sanctions are going to come. The global response is going to come. And in the midst of that, they're going to offer an olive branch to the Americans and the world. They're in power, they're low government, they're illegal. They're going to say to them, okay, let's negotiate. This is what we want. A, an interim government. B, a new election, etc. I believe the Americans are going to go to the PPP and say, do you want this? The PPP is going to have an automatic response. No, we are not negotiating with an illegal government. What happens then is the Americans and the PPP are going to have intense negotiations. While all of this is going on, of course, the Granger presidency goes on. I don't know. Sanjeev Datadin will have to come in here. I don't know how the PPP is going to react to that. I don't know if they're going to bow to American pressure. You're talking about a superpower here, right, with control over South America and the Caribbean, etc. The second thing I believe they're hoping for is to stay in power and wait for a Biden presidency with a Democratic president and the Democratic control of the House of Congress and the Senate. And then they are going to try to get some of the Black caucus MPs to talk to Biden and talk to the Secretary of State for a settlement. The problem they're going to have with a Biden presidency is that a Biden presidency, as soon as the government of Guyana reaches out to talk, the Biden presidency is going to call in the Carter Center because it's headed by Jimmy Carter, grandson, and it has enormous respect in the world. So they're not going to make any decision on Guyana unless they listen to the Carter Center. And the Carter Center isn't going to buy anything like an interim government, etc. That is how I envisage it. In the meantime, since they're in power, they're going to control their supporters not to go down Regent Street and harm the Chinese people and harm construction, etc. That is how I see it. There's no coming out of power until there is some arrangement with the international community for the PNC to have a stake in government, either through an interim arrangement or through constitutional renovations that would allow for the PNC to be in power. So
right. This was attempted in Fiji, right, Freddie?
Pardon me?
This was attempted in Fiji.
Well,
no, in Fiji it was the reverse. It was
Okay, go ahead.
The party that won was in, but the others.
That's true.
I understand it. But
Yeah.
Freddie, I got a question for you. In the scenario that you write about, I know that you wrote in March about they are never going to leave office, or that was the sentiment. And I've seen you write continuously about the various machinations that would take place. Do you think that sanctions are going to change that equation?
Sanctions are going to force them to the table, not the visa revocations. It's the financial thing. The Bank of Guyana is
when you say force them to the table, listen, we all saw what was said about that the Secretary of State said that about sanctions, he's instructed things to be done. I've done just a little bit of research looking it up, and I've spoken to someone who is an old friend who has a little bit more familiarity with those things and how they work.
You got friends in the Coral Research establishment.
No, I just went to school. I just went to school with a friend who happens to be working in Washington now. He's a lawyer like me, but what I'm saying, he's not privy to the state secrets or anything like that. But what he was saying is that the language of the instruction being given is a usual benchmark towards the process of the imposition of sanctions. It's a usual benchmark. They usually announce when that is, and that's usually when it's imminent, meaning it's a week or two. It's a short time away, and my understanding of the sanctions that are being considered is if you're going to sanction those who are directly benefiting, which is similarly worded to what happened in two other places, Iran being one, Russia being the other, and those who have benefited. It didn't only go to the politicians, it didn't only go to the public officials, it went to their backers, their financiers, the main supporters, the financiers of the parties. They were all done. I mean, as a result of that, for example, Roman Abramovich, that owns Chelsea Football Club, that I am a fan of, he's not seen a home game in more than a year, because he hasn't gone to the UK because of visa issues. I mean, that might be a little bit more along the lines of England's treatment, but it's identical with the United States. Now, those things, if they do happen, they're going to affect the businessmen in Guyana who are supporting the coalition. It's going to affect their brothers and sisters, their nieces and nephews, their children. It's going to affect, it's not only them, it's everyone else. And then there are implications if they have family who are citizens who are not born in the United States but were naturalized.
So I have.
Would that change the equation though, Freddie? That's what I'm saying. Does that change the equation of them giving up versus staying in?
And also, Freddie, before you answer that, let me throw this at you at the same time, because this is an important dimension I would like if you could assess, sir. That assessment that you gave earlier of them staying in power and to get to the negotiating table, do we assume, how do I say this very carefully, do we assume that the Guyanese population will continue to not have a say that will change the course of events as might be in the PNC's mind?
Well, I don't see room for that. One is that the population is so pessimistic, has been so saddened by what has happened, that there's a creeping resignation. If you go back, Yog, I mean, Sanjeev is pretty young, but of course he reads a lot of Cold War stuff, so he would know what happened in the 70s in Guyana. He would know what happened in the 70s in Guyana. People were so driven by pessimism that Burnham seems so impregnable that the population just lived in sad resignation. If they stay in power, the population could be galvanized to show their resentment, but that will have to be a key strategy by the PPP. I mean, the PPP is a strategic play in Guyana that controls vast enclaves in this place, and that could make life unbearable for a rogue regime. But would the PPP do that, knowing that along the line they will naturally be in government? Secondly, would the Americans allow the PPP to do that? I think I don't think the PPP would want to shut out American advice and American discussion and just mobilize the population. I am not too sure that's the nature of the leadership of the PPP at this stage.
But Freddie, let me push back to you a little bit. It is largely felt by people along the countryside that the earlier protests that started in Lusignan and that started up West Coast Berbice was not necessarily the PPP. It was the tail wagging the dog. That's one. And two, where does the army fit in all of this?
Well, the army's role comes in if there's national demonstrative rejection against the government staying into power, and I am contending that demonstrative expression will have to be nurtured and directed and shaped by the PPP. And given the way the 21st century is going, I don't think the PPP will want to risk put all their eggs in one basket. They will prefer the negotiating way. Because a crippled government is virtually a suicidal government. And the PPP will know that once the sanctions cripple the PNC, there is going to be a moment of collapse. And the social upheaval is going to be an intervention the PPP don't want, because social intervention may not hasten the collapse. It may make the illegal governors more hardened. I mean, remember, you're dealing with a cultural tradition that is based in Burnhamism. I mean, Burnham was prepared for the country to fall flat in his face rather than negotiate a settlement with the West or with the PPP. It is in 85, just before he died, he was opening some negotiations with the PPP, but one doesn't know if he would have reneged on that. Burnham was such a maximum narcissist that he would not have shared power. So everything will depend on Sanjeev. And when I say Sanjeev, remember he's in the PPP leadership. So everything will depend on people like Sanjeev and the leadership of the PPP. What do they do in the crisis with an illegal government and sanctions crippling? They have two directions they can take. Mobilize against the government and hope that it falls. In that case, we don't know what the security forces are going to do. Or secondly, given the inevitability of collapse, negotiate with the West for some kind of accommodation with the PNC, though I believe it's not going to be a substantial accommodation.
And Freddie, you frightened me there a little by some of these. But let me ask you a question: Have you figured out what kind of mindset Donald Trump, as the president of the United States, in the whole geopolitical situation with Venezuela next door and Guyana here, a rogue state? What do you believe that Donald Trump, being the man that he is going to allow something like this?
Well, I don't think he's going to allow it, but I don't think he's going to want to use force, because the Canadians and CARICOM, the Canadians and the EU are people just saturated with the diplomatic way. They will want to negotiate with the government. They may be afraid of too much pressure. Don't forget, Trinidad and Suriname have a lot, and Barbados have a lot to lose if there's social upheaval in Guyana. People are just going to take fishing boats and go across to Trinidad and stay illegally. So I don't think the aggressive nature of the Trump presidency you will see filtering down in Guyana. I think the people in the State Department are going to take the lead. Trump is busy with the re-election and all the books about the scandal, and I think the negotiators are the people in the State Department are going to go to the negotiating route. I suspect the PNC believe that if they stay in government, negotiations will come about. And I believe in an election coming up in the U.S. and the CARICOM people wary of Guyanese refugees, they're going to urge the PPP to negotiate.
And have you taken...
Freddie, in terms of your line of thought here, sorry, Leonard, in terms of your line of thought there, here's a question. Where then would, are you assuming, or do we assume that a declaration would not be made? And if the answer is that a declaration will be made, what then happens to Irfan Ali, who will be sworn in? Do we have a situation potentially like what's happening in Venezuela?
If the government staying into power in a legal way is independent of whether there's a declaration or not, they are going to reject the declaration. And I think Granger telegraphed his thoughts. They're going to reject the declaration on the basis that the election was fraudulent, the election was tampered with, and therefore they cannot accept that declaration. The point you're asking is what happens if there is a swearing in. Yes, we may end up with a Venezuela situation, but Venezuela is too important strategically, geopolitically. It has 45 million people. It has a large army. So the EU and Americans see a greater stake, and that's why they recognize the opposition leader as the president. They're not going to go that route in Guyana.
And Freddie, have you taken into account, this is I'm not sure how long we continue with this, but have you taken into account the mood of the people, and that this may not have been necessarily the 80s, that the people have changed, not only in the tolerance, but in the whole mindset and everything?
Well, you have to amplify on that. Yes, this is not the 70s. Yes, people have changed, but you have to go further than that. Are you saying we have more of a restless population, angrier population that wouldn't tolerate the criminal fascistization in Guyana in the 21st century? If you're saying that, I would say yes or no. I would say no, in that you're not going to find pockets of resistance coming up. I would say yes if the PPP is able to mobilize its supporters and say, don't accept this government. But if
but Freddie, I got to tell you this. Freddie. Times have changed.
I think so.
Times have changed. You say that I do value what you're saying, and it is a bleak thing, but I assure you that the days of being powerless, we're not living in those days anymore. I don't want anything I say to be conveyed as incitement or a threat or an attempt to say that this is how a resolution should happen. It is not. It is not intended in any way, shape, or form. But Freddie, I do believe that there are two things that are different now. One, the rank and file membership of the coalition and their supporters do not have the appetite, because they have been over a period of 120 days plus. They have seen for themselves what it is, and a lot of them will not maybe say anything, but they're not going to be motivated to do the wrong thing. Secondly, given the dynamics of how Guyana is now, I don't think that it's a one-sided affair about supporters whose supporters are more of or more willing to force their way about something. I don't think it's a one-sided street anymore. But I tell you that I believe the reason for it is many of the supporters of the coalition are not quite in that vein anymore. And I do believe that on the side of the PPP, we're not powerless. The world has changed. And I don't think we're doing that anymore. But I want to come back to one other thing, which I was trying to check while the program was going on so that I could tell you and Yog. And a friend of mine has kindly updated me. Lowenfield, as do everyone in the Secretariat, are employed by contracts, which means they're not term employments as if they were civil servants. The contracts all have the same clause of dismissal, 3 months notice by either party, or dismissal for cause immediately. Now, if you're wrong and you should have given him the 3 months notice, then his measure of damages he will be paid 3 months notice. But dismissal for cause, I rather suspect that cause has been made out if you wouldn't carry out the instructions of the commission. But the dismissal is pursuant to a contract. Now, as to whether or not there is a provision, there is no statutory provision for the elevation of persons to carry out the movement upwards of the deputy CEO to the CEO. What has to happen, however, if it is a contractual situation, I would venture this. What has to happen is that if there is the removal of Lowenfield, which I think should take place if he doesn't present a report in accordance with the recount data tomorrow at 11 o'clock, if he is removed, then the position that follows that would be you would have to appoint your CEO at that stage. Failing which, if it's all contractual positions, then the DCEO must perform the functions. Because that's how when you have a system that is entirely based on the contractual positions, it would be usual that there might be a clause to that effect, that if the person ahead of you, the superior, is not present, because that's more akin to what you would find like in a private corporation. If it's all done on a contractual basis, that might indeed be the case. But the person who would substantively hold the office, entirely the discretion of the commission. The commission can choose anyone they choose. They do not have to be held ransom. And I would dare say, by extension, the people of Guyana do not have to be held ransom to a man who wants to be difficult, play games with words. He should really invest in a Scrabble board.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Sanjeev. And ladies and gentlemen, we are getting to that time when we'll wrap up our program for tonight. It's been an interesting discussion. You may or may not agree with the logics and the presentation of both of our panelists here tonight, but it is taking history, the lessons of history, clearly in mind as we analyze what has happened and what will happen. And don't forget, in all of this history, David Granger is an old man, a very old man who has been there and done that. And when Freddie speaks, Sanjeev, I got to take Freddie's side on this, because when Freddie speaks, you are talking about a man who has been part of the Burnham history of this country, and he knows very well about all of these things. So, Freddie, I'm going to come back to you for your closing thoughts, sir, if you don't mind.
Well, my obligation is to history and scholarship. I mean, I have a different obligation to humanity. So I can't stay on this phone and give Guyanese a false optimism. Mm-hmm. You are dealing with a regime here that when you think of the attitude of Bautista in Suriname, it makes these people virtual monsters. That man cannot travel outside because he's wanted in Holland. the Suriname government could extradite him. And that man conceded an election. You have in Guyana a mindset that I think, honestly, is very, very frightening. It's very frightening because even in some troubled third world countries, some autocratic, oligarchic third world countries, there is some reason, rationality, and logic. I mean, Northern Ireland, they sat down and negotiated. There is no negotiating with these people. And what is frightening is the new kids on the block, the AFC, people that you think embrace a new political culture, people who came out, came to Guyana with the intention of instilling a new political culture, is just as monstrous and evil as the old Burnhamite PNC. So my final thoughts is that I hope for the best. I think we have a very, very young population, and they need a future. 70% of our people are under 40. They shouldn't be going through this. I mean, if it's the older folks, all right, they are into their 70s and 80s. But I cannot engender a false hope in them by saying, look, I think everything is going to be all right tomorrow. It doesn't look good. You're dealing with some very, very depraved people whose mental horizon are deformed.
Gotcha. And Sanjeev, over to you for your thoughts on this, because here's a couple other things. And Freddie, sorry, don't leave. I may come back to you because another thought just popped into mind. Sanjeev, in terms of not just the legalese, in terms of what is ahead of us is an 11 o'clock supposed expectation of a report from Lowenfield. And, regardless of how you turn this or twist it, if Lowenfield makes another hiccup, it's another week down the drain, or down the road, we're kicking this thing again. So what are your thoughts in terms of the expediency which this nation deserves at this stage?
I think Lowenfield should, as a public officer, do the right thing. That's the starting point. It appears that he is bent on not doing the right thing. I do believe that the fact that he was given a second letter today to say letter number 1 was clear enough, it still stands, and we expect that you would present a report. But all that letter number 2 did is extend the time from 2 p.m. today to 11 a.m. tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So at 11 a.m. tomorrow, they will have to provide that report. If he does not provide the report, I do hope that what the commission does is act swiftly. Dismiss him as the CEO of GCOM and appoint someone else to be the CEO of GCOM as quickly as possible. Now, this can be done instantaneously. It can be done in the same day, and then that new person is instructed to present a report. Now, everyone is, or I've seen that while we've been on the air, that a lot of the persons who support APNU think that what I'm saying is, to invite great discomfort and disquiet in the country. It's not. It's to do exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. Listen, it's not that everyone is ganging up and telling the supporters of APNU and disregarding what they're saying, but they're being fooled and lied to by their leaders. Their leaders are making it up as they go along. The leaders are unhinged, incapable of telling them the truth because they have promises. But it's their personal gain. It is not the gain of the rank and file. And what is being done is they're being used. I would hope that the declaration happens quickly. Even if Lowenfield is stubborn, I would hope that within 4 or 5 days at most, this process is over. And I say that because you can cater for a day to appoint the new CEO to present a report. You will then call the commission meeting for its consideration. My guess is the government commissioners are not going to attend. So the meeting has to be recalled, same time, same place, 24 hours later, and the quorum wouldn't matter if they attended. They would stay away and deprive the meeting of a quorum in the first instance. But on the second instance, whether they stay away or not, they can't, the quorum is whoever is there. So that we can have a declaration in about 4 days or 5 days from now, we can have a swearing in and the country can move on. The leadership of APNU has no statesmanship to it. They will put the nation, continue, if allowed, put this nation to the sword. And we cannot allow that to happen. We cannot allow the tail to wag the dog. We must do what is right. We must move forward. Whatever it is they say are all these discrepancies or credibility issues or whatever it is that they have about the ballots and the votes, file your election petition. Bring it up and put it to hearing as quickly as possible. That can be done.
Right.
And then have it ventilated.
Thank
but
you.
I believe that it must. We have allowed this to drag on, Yog, in the name of peace and the comity among our people. These are the reasons why we go to the extra length every time. But it has to come to an end. It cannot continue. It is unsustainable.
And that is well said, Counsel. Freddie, one of the things that I wanted to ask you and ask you to stay on for is the following. OAS has made a release probably an hour ago,
Yes.
in which it said the following. GCOM should exclude from the current electoral process and indeed from all future electoral processes those persons whose action display clear partisan bias and who apply this bias unreservedly in hindering the natural unfolding of the democratic process in Guyana. That is one. Number two, Freddie, their closing paragraph, in my own humble view, is very soft. It says as follows. A credible conclusion of the 2020 elections is essential if Guyana is to remain a democracy. What's your thoughts on this, Freddie?
Well, that's just another expression of concern by very, very important global actors that will not have any effect on this regime. It ties in with my previous answer to you that we're dealing with an unnatural state of mind in this country among its leaders. There was OS saying that 15 minutes ago, we're going to get something tomorrow, going to get something the next day. But I feel the APNU AFC feel that their world has collapsed. They're not in a mental state to accept that. Right now, they're obsessed with just keeping power to the exclusion of any reasonable philosophical thinking. And they're going to see the OAS as that's just another emanation. I think the key is the Americans and the EU. The EU, the United States are two of the biggest economic players in the world, two of the biggest geopolitical players in the world. And these people have been defying them for 4 months. So they're just going to toss the OAS concern, the Secretary General of the UN. That man's agendas must be so high. He's got so much things to think about. And he was able to attack a swift declaration in Guyana. Yet that isn't going to bother them. Yog, I am sure tomorrow the war room of the PNC are going to say things that is going to make this nation feel more distraught. But I agree with Sanjay that we just have to stand up and be counted. And I just hope we stand up and be counted.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Freddie. And Sanjeev, it's been a pleasure to have you and Freddie Kissoon here tonight. And I got a book to give Sanjeev for his birthday or his wedding anniversary, A History of the Cold War. Okay.
And in response to that, Sanjeev, you should give him a phone, a smartphone. We did offer to buy him a phone, and he says, "Nah, I'm going to stay with my mango pelter." So I'll leave it at that.
No, I tell you, Freddie is a man of he's got his own unique ways. He does things his way, and that's the way it is.
But you can never doubt his patriotism and his desire to call things out.
I wouldn't be surprised. Freddie, do you still do the column on a typewriter?
No, don't go there.
Yes, at 98 is Atari.
He used to. I know he used to.
Anyway, it's been
Freddie, I want to trouble you.
It's been wonderful to have you both. Mr. Kissoon, have a wonderful night and do give our regards to your family.
Sanjeev.
Mr. Datadin, do give our regards to your wonderful family, to my friend.
Sanjeev, are you here with me?
Thank you for having me, Yog, Leonard, Freddie. It's always a pleasure.
Sanjeev,
I
are
think
you
Freddie
hearing
has
me?
a parting shot for you. Yes, Freddie.
Please give my regards to your pretty wife and your little baby.
I will certainly.
And our regards to your little dog, too, and cat.
Oh, yeah, that's the love of my life.
Thank you for having me. Good night to all. Good night to your listeners. Be safe, New Year. God be with you.
Thank you. And Mr. Leonard Gildarie, thank you for being such a gracious co-host. As with regards to same thing goes to our technical team, Mr. Kevin Smith and Raj and Josh, all of the guys there at Kaieteur Radio making this possible, and of course the owner of the station for doing all of this on behalf of the people of Guyana. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you here in room 592 with Counsel Attorney-at-Law Sanjeev Datadin and our famous and good analyst, Mr. Freddie Kissoon, joining us here tonight. We look forward to continue this chat in the new week. And look out, we may have a room 592 so tomorrow night, depending on what's happening there at GCOM, ladies and gentlemen. We'll keep you posted. Do have a great night, everyone. Stay safe. And remember to do a prayer for Guyana. It's still one of the best, if not the very best country in the world, with poor leaders, yes, but still the best country in the world. Do have a great night, ladies and gentlemen. And bye-bye now. Be safe.
Thank you.
COVID-19 tips sponsored by Dex Soap. 1. Practice social distancing. 2. Wear your mask when leaving the house. 3. Wash your hands regularly for 20 seconds using our Dex Soap. 4. Cover your nose and mouth with a disposable tissue or flex elbow when you cough or sneeze. Choose Dex Soap for that extra cleanliness. Dex Soap is affordable and available nationwide.
Kaieteur Radio.
Covering Guyana from coast to coast.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Berbice 99.5 FM.